We are going to dive into the Birmingham Stallions, the back-to-back USFL champions. I'm going to bring in Scott Adamson from AdamsonMedia.com, who covers all things Birmingham. We are going to talk about the Stallions start in the UFL. Before we get started, a quick reminder that you can get all kinds of Stallions merchandise on RoyalRetros.com. They have shirts, jerseys, much more. Check out all the great stuff at RoyalRetros.com. Use the code JLS to get 10% off your order. You can click the video description for more. And let's bring in Scott Adamson, AdamsonMedia.com. He's also the author of The Home Team, My Bromance with Off-Brand Football. And Scott has never one time asked me to pimp this book on this channel, but I do it every time because it is absolutely one of my favorite all-time alt football books. Scott, I appreciate you joining me to talk some Birmingham Stallions. You've been entrenched down there for quite a while.
Well, it is always a pleasure to be with you, my friend. It's always fun to talk about the Stallions, too.
Well, let's talk about it. And we're going to start with some positivity here. Now, this is, for those who know Scott or read him, he's had his heart broken over the years, and that's what kind of the book is about with the alt football in Birmingham. But Scott, you recently heard from the UFL Director of Operations, Daryl Johnston, who was in Birmingham, and you wrote a recent article on AdamsonMedia.com. He has a lot of alt football experience, and you wrote, and this was the quote, "I'm going to trust him and the UFL founders to do the right thing, however long it might take." And so I think there's some optimism there. This feels like a league that might be built for the long haul, especially, I guess there's, in comparison to other spring leagues.
Right. And anytime a league has come along, you hear from them that we've got the commitment. Like when the XFL was relaunched, we have a 3-year commitment. And then the Alliance, we have a 3-year commitment. Well, you can say that, but actually saying it and having it happen, they're very different things. But I do feel like you had Fox with the USFL, you've got Redbird Capital with the XFL, and now they're working together. I think they do realize that this is not something that's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, or maybe even 5 years. And anybody, regardless of how much money you have, if you're in the business of making money, you want to see that happen sooner than later. But I do honestly believe that they're willing to kind of see what happens and see over time, whether, again, it's 3 or 5 years, what's our base attendance going to be? What is our average television viewership going to be? And then maybe work out from there.
Are you optimistic that it's going to be what it was before in Birmingham with the USFL when there is a new league here?
It's so hard to say because truthfully, Birmingham, from the standpoint of fan support, has really disappointed me because both seasons of USFL, the tickets were dirt cheap. And I remember thinking before the very first USFL game where Birmingham played the Generals, I told my wife I left the house like 4 hours early because I said, this is probably going to sell out. It's going to be a traffic nightmare. And then they ended up with 17,500 people. And yeah, there were weather issues, but that entire season, they never got beyond that. And then last season, I think probably they never released attendance figures, but I think probably the largest crowd was around 18,000. And I don't know if like the USFL was a victim of its own success in terms of the television product, because USFL and XFL both, that's an outstanding production. And I know a guy like myself who's gotten a little bit older, it's a whole lot easier when you've got great production values like that to stay home where you're 10 steps from the refrigerator and 30 steps from the restroom.
Right. Oh yeah. And the tickets, you're right. They were dirt cheap. I was down there that first year and it was a fun experience, but yeah, it seemed like for the Birmingham games, there were a lot of people, not, as you point out, not what I think they expected. But for the other games, it was sparsely attended, like, it happened in year 2 with some of these hubs. And, Daryl Johnston, he also, and maybe this plays into it, he said he had kind of suggested having 2 hubs, one of them being in Birmingham for the UFL with the other in Arlington. Do you think that might have played a little bit into the decision not to do it all in Arlington rather than Birmingham, because maybe the attendance wasn't what they had hoped for, and especially in year 2?
It may have, but I think ultimately it did come down to, you look at the airport situation in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I think it is a lot easier for these teams to fly out on weekends. And the hybrid hub model, I hate the hub models. I know why they're doing it. I understand it. The hybrid hub model is much better than I think the USFL hub model, especially the first year. I mean, even being in Birmingham, I mean, you've got the Birmingham Stallions and the New Jersey General. No, you had the Birmingham Generals, so the hybrid hub model for right now, I think, is fine, but still a league like this is going to have to really have community engagement. And you still can't have that right now. You can have it in Arlington. All 8 teams can go to schools and hospitals and do volunteer work in Arlington. But considering they're going to fly out on Friday and go to their home markets and play, they're going to have a really short time in the cities they represent. So, yeah, I do understand that they've got to do that now, but they've really got to think of getting to a point sooner than later when all the teams are actually in their markets and part of those communities.
Well, and that leads me into what I was going to ask you here, because as you are in Birmingham, does it feel like maybe the city and the fans there have lost a little bit of ownership? Because for 2 years, the Birmingham Stallions were there in the USFL and hub there and base there, but now they're not.
Yeah, it's there's a smallish, hardcore group of fans here, and they're great. I mean, they are really into it. I don't think it's going to affect them because they, I think, like us, understand that this is still kind of a proof of concept thing in terms of how this league is going to grow and how they're going to build it. But yeah, I think as the season goes on, because the last couple of years, there were times when you could go to the grocery store and you'd see a Stallions player. Well, if you go to the grocery store on a Wednesday during this spring, you're not going to see a Stallions player unless he just escaped, because, they're going to be in Arlington.
Right.
So, I don't know. I think that's more of a kid thing when you're looking at some of the younger fans, because, I just remember, I think it was the second year of the WFL, Matthew Reed and Art Cantrell were signing autographs at the strip mall. And I took my WFL ball to him, got him to sign it. That was still one of the great thrills of my life, and you had this just happen during a game week. And fans in Birmingham, Memphis, wherever, they're not going to get that during game week right now, with a hybrid hub.
Yeah, I mean, you're remembering that 50 years later. Can you imagine? There's probably some from, kids who got to do some of those community events in 2022 and 2023 that are kind of missing out on this. And you're right. It hopefully, we all want the success of. I think what the UFL wants to do is to eventually, kind of the USFL plan, will hub now and try to put these, teams and markets eventually. But as we know, let's get through a year first and get to a championship game, and then we move on. You've had a chance to talk to Skip Holtz several times. You and I were in agreement on one thing for sure. When he took that special assistant job with Northwestern, I thought that was it. That was going to be it for Skip Holtz. And you can kind of understand, as you mentioned in one of your articles, that pull of Saturday college football brings a lot of people back into it. But it was funny that Skip Holtz said when he took the job that he said, well, listen, I've got another gig that I have in the spring and I can't lose that. Were you surprised by that? Because I know I was.
I was surprised until I actually started talking to him both on and off the record. And he seriously loves this. I mean, when he says that he's having the most fun that he's ever had coaching, I believe him. And you can just, I mean, he's an enthusiastic guy. I mean, we've always seen that throughout his career, but now when he talks about it, I mean, he's really, really fired up, and you can tell that he believes in the mission. And I think he kind of likes the segue of what he's doing now, where he spent all those years as a college coach and he's helping these guys grow up to be better football players. He's still doing that to a degree. He's just trying to give them an avenue. They're already very good football players, but he's trying to get them to the next level. And I truly think he's all in. I would absolutely be stunned if he left this league as long as the league lasts.
Yeah, I agree now. Yeah, especially after, he's had back-to-back championships. You would think like a coach would say, okay, I've been there and done that. What more can I do? But yeah, when he comes back and he says like, yeah, I've got a job in the spring. I want to continue to do that. You talked about moving players up to the next level. He's had a couple here, with the kicker, Brandon Aubrey, Alex Magoo, of course, the quarterback who moved on to the NFL. Uh, Skip goes into training camp. He went into this training camp with, I mean, he went in with a bunch of quarterbacks. It seems like he's got a lot to choose from. I thought this would be Jamar Smith's team, kind of no matter what. That will play out, I guess, in training camp. But what did you think about him continuing to add these quarterbacks as they went into the preseason?
Yeah, I mean, it's a full room now. I mean, you got Matt Corral. I know that was a big splash, and a lot of people are looking at him like, okay, people were expecting him to be an NFL big deal. So now is he going to be a UFL big deal? But you also have Adrian Martinez, Jalen Morton. I think it's going to be kind of fun to see how that plays out, because I believe the league is going to carry 3 quarterbacks this year. You don't know who the first one out is going to be, but I know Holtz, and he hasn't had the opportunity due to injuries, but I remember, I think it was the week before the Stallions' first game of their first season, he was already saying, I'm going to play Magoo and Smith both. One will be a starter, but I'm going to play the other one a lot. And of course, it didn't work out because Magoo got hurt. And then season 2, it was just the opposite. Jamar is supposed to be the starter. He gets injured, so then it becomes Magoo's team. What I'm really hoping, regardless of who the starter is or who the backup is, I hope they don't have to deal with those kind of injuries this year, because it would be really fun to see what kind of battle we're going to have in camp and then how that plays out when the season starts.
And the Birmingham Stallions go in with the most NFL experience so far, into training camp, which I think, I continue to say every week, I always change my mind on who's going to be the favorite in this thing. But, I think that's got to be exciting for the Stallion fan base to have that much NFL experience and those kind of quarterbacks under a guy like Skip Holtz.
And it's fun, too, because normally you think of a league like this of having no continuity, but there is some continuity with the Stallions. CJ Marable's back, Scooby Wright. They have a lot of people who've either been with the team from the beginning or were with them last year. So there is some certain familiarity among the fan base now. And I think that really helps. When you start a league, you're thinking, well, you need to have local players, guys from nearby colleges. But the longer a league like this lasts, when you have returning players, all of a sudden they become your players. I mean, they might be from Arizona or wherever originally, but as long as they've been on your team for 2 or 3 years, you can identify with them more.
That you're right. That says a lot, because, Holtz kind of even said, like, every year you kind of have to restart every year in football, no matter the level. But to have that kind of continuity, I think that speaks to a lot, to what he has done there and what spring football means to these players. Because even though we're going into a new league and it's a merged league, it feels like this is the strongest that it is going to be. This could really work this year.
Yeah, to me, it's just wild to think, okay, you and I and others like us, and we are a tribe.
Yeah,
we're talking
correct.
about professional spring football for the 3rd consecutive year.
Right.
Normally, you get through one, and then if you ever have something like this, well, what happened? Why did the Alliance of American Football fold, or why did the XFL fail? Well, now we're not talking about a failure. We're talking about a merger, which is really stunning in a way.
Yeah, and I hope that I said before, I really thought that was going to be the key to success for spring football. I thought it might happen next year, but it happened, and it happened quickly. We mentioned at the starting here that you wrote the book about how many teams you have covered in Birmingham or have been a fan of growing up. I mean, you've got an Alabama Hawks here. Now, tell me about the Alabama Hawks.
Yeah, the Alabama Hawks, they were in the Continental League back in the late 60s, and they were actually based out of Huntsville, but they had very little fan support, especially in their last season. So they basically moved to Birmingham for their last 2 games. But I think their biggest crowd, or the biggest crowd they drew in Birmingham, I think was like 2,500. So they decided, Birmingham's not really the place for us either. But as it turned out, the league folded, so it really didn't matter. But I still have to show them love.
Well, sure. I mean, listen, we all love our T-shirts, right? And, looking at the banners behind you there, that just really chronicles, what a rich history that Birmingham has. So what is the tally here on how many teams that you have been a fan of or you have covered that were in Birmingham? And I'm going to go over under on 50.
Oh, I mean, Birmingham Americans, Birmingham Vulcans, Alabama Magic. That was the team I won the Name the Team contest for, by the way.
Right.
Yeah, also in the AFA.
Yeah.
Then you got the Stallions, Birmingham Fire, the World League.
Right.
And then I think we jumped. I think there was a lag time until you went to the Canadian League and the Barracudas. Then there was the Birmingham Thunderbolts.
Let's
Birmingham
never forget the Steel Dogs now.
Steel, yeah, that indoor football, that's always been kind of a niche thing. But yeah, had the Steel
Very
Dogs. That
niche.
was their first game too. But then you worked up to the XFL and then the Birmingham Iron of the AAF, and here we are with the Stallions now going into a team that took a legacy nickname and now they're entering their second league, which is kind of bizarre.
That's true. It's so weird. It's Scott Adamson, who has said that, alt football is his porn. You can tell there just from being able to name off all those teams. It's always great to catch up with you. AdamsonMedia.com, a fellow Threads poster, by the way. You can find him on there. We were refugees from that other site. Also, yeah, you can find him there. It's SL Adamson 1960. You can find him Adamson Media on Facebook. Write some great articles, not just about alt football, but you cover all things Birmingham on there.
I try to. Yeah, I've sort of, at first I was just going to kind of, dip my toe in a little bit, but then I got really into the basketball team. So now I'm pretty much fully immersed in the Birmingham sports experience again.
Well, even for people who don't live in Birmingham, I encourage you to sign up. Great stories, even some great flash fiction, as he calls it every once in a while. Scott Adamson, thank you so much for joining me here.
Thank you, John. I always enjoy it.